Hi everybody, this is my 20-gallon open-topped Angelfish tank down here in my fish room, and last night as I was topping off the water I noticed that the water looked a little cloudy. You can definitely see all the green algae growing on the glass. I need to address that, that's not my concern. But the water itself looks a little on the cloudy side, and I'm really not sure what's going on to make it cloudy. The only thing I've done recently was a chemiclean treatment, and I did that properly. I used the airstone, I did a water change afterwards, and I've never had any kind of issue whatsoever with water turning cloudy after I've used the chemiclean. I've used it many times over the years. I've always had good success with that. But there's always a lot of questions about whether or not it disrupts your nitrogen cycle. I always say it does not. I've never experienced it disrupting my nitrogen cycle, but I'm looking at my tank and I've got cloudy water. And usually, in my experience, when the water sort of cloudies up out of nowhere, a lot of people for some reason always seem to say that's some sort of bacterial bloom. That may be true, it may not, I don't know, but I always associate cloudy water with a disrupted nitrogen cycle, and I usually find that I've got slightly elevated nitrites whenever I've got cloudy water. But in this case, I tested all my water parameters to see what was going on, if anything was out of sorts, and I found something a little bit interesting. I did test the nitrates just to see what they were. I can't really imagine how nitrates would play a role in making my water cloudy, but I did check them anyway just to be on the safe side. And so let's go over and have a look at what my results were, and then we can have a brief discussion about what they are and why I think they might be what they are. And what they are is this. My nitrates are, they're getting up there. They're orange, but they're not even in the red yet, so we'll call that 30 parts per million or something. Again, no reason in my mind that I can think why 30 parts per million nitrates would cause cloudy water in my tank. That's not a concern of mine. The nitrites were very, very clearly a negative result. There was no change in color whatsoever, so I already went ahead and dumped that test out. I used the same vial after rinsing it out to test for ammonia, and the ammonia came out questionable enough that I had to do some serious rooting around to try to find this card. And sure enough, that color right there is what we're looking at, which is 0.25 parts per million. So I do have a tiny little bit of ammonia starting to build up in the tank, which is a sure sign that the nitrogen cycle's been disrupted. So let's go back over to the tank and we can have a little bit of chat about maybe why that is. So I've been thinking about it over the last half an hour or so, and the only thing I've done to this tank, as I've already said, was that chemiclean treatment. And why on earth would a chemiclean treatment cause me to have any disruption in my nitrogen cycle whatsoever? And I've thought about it, and I believe the reason is not anything to do with the chemiclean treatment. It was how I did the chemiclean treatment, and that was that I got in there with a gravel vac, and I really, really vigorously scrunched around in the gravel. I had the cyanobacteria was growing in sort of sheets on the bottom, and instead of using my normal siphon, it's an open-ended siphon to just suck the sheets out of it, I wound up crushing it and breaking it up and sort of using the substrate and the gravel vac as kind of like a mortar and pestle to sort of grind it all together and grind it up so that the loose and broken bits of cyanobacteria would get sucked up through the gravel vac, and of course the heavier gravel would stay behind, as the gravel vac is intended to work. And I did that pretty vigorously in here. And I think that disrupted my nitrogen cycle. I speak all the time about how the beneficial bacteria that grows in our tanks, what we think of as the foundation of our nitrogen cycle, that grows on surface area. It does not grow in your water column, it grows on things. And it particularly grows on things that are not brightly lit. So as far as the woodwork that gets regularly scraped by my pleco, and up until recently my snail used to be in here scouring the glass and scouring all the leaves and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I have a lot of nitrifying bacteria on the decor in this tank. unless you're talking about like maybe down below in some of the darker areas underneath the rocks, down on the bottom of the wood, there's probably some beneficial bacteria living in there. But this substrate, it's a planted substrate, and I've talked about it before. It's a really good substrate. It's designed to work with your nitrogen cycle, or it's designed to work as part of your nitrogen cycle. It's bimodal, meaning that it's got two different grades of size gravel. It's got really sort of sandy-like gravel, and then it's got sort of gravelly gravel, larger stuff that we can see here on the surface. And so the smaller bits sort of settle to the bottom. They allow for a good root growth and all that, and they also allow for denitrification of your aquarium. It's a really sort of dense packed sand that allows for a much more slow movement of water to go through it, whereas the stuff on top is much more light and airy and porous, and it allows water and oxygen to circulate freely through it, and therefore it's a good place for the nitrifying bacteria in your tank to live. And so all in all, it's a great substrate. It's called Eco Complete by Carib Sea. I've been trying to think of that for the last several minutes now. Eco Complete by Carib Sea is what it is, and I think by getting in there and scrunching around the way I was and rooting it all up and really giving it a good thorough gravel vac, I think I did just enough disruption to it that it's causing me to have just a little tiny bit of an ammonia spike. I actually just spoke the other day about ammonia spikes, and I've never seen a big one. I've never seen one jump up to, 3, 4, 5 parts per million or anything like that. But I have now gone up to 0.25 parts per million. That's not enough to really alarm me, but it's enough to concern me. I am going to go ahead and do a little water change on this tank just to bring those levels down just a little bit. Again, anything over 0.25 parts per million, and I'm doing a water change, unless I'm trying to get a tank cycled in or something like that, and then I might go through a little bit different process, but that's a topic for a different video, not this one. I will end by saying, when you have these hang on the back filters, that little black sponge you can see right there, that's all the biofilter this tank has in it as far as the filter goes. The rest of the biofiltration comes from whatever is in the tank. So if you've got a bare glass tank and all you've got on there is one of those little hang on the back filters, remember that that tank doesn't have a whole lot of biofiltration. So first of all, you couldn't stock it very heavily, and secondly, any little disruption to your nitrogen cycle could have a very significant effect if that's all the biomaterial you have in the tank. When you've got a tank like this, and it's got lots of substrate, and there's rocks, and there's woodwork, and there's plants, and of course the plants do absorb the ammonia directly, and they also absorb nitrites directly out of the water. And so I've got a little bit of breathing room. I've got a little bit of a buffer capacity, if you will. I'm not talking about a pH buffer, but I've got a little bit of a buffer in the sense that, ammonia spikes and nitrite spikes aren't going to be quite so spiky, and they're not going to be quite so quick, and they aren't going to be quite so large. But if you've got a bare glass tank and all you've got on the back is one of those hang on the back filters like that, keep in mind you really don't have a ton of biological filtration in your tank, and you're kind of sitting in a precarious situation. If anything is to shift, you could really have a major shift very quickly with that kind of setup. So there you go, just a few thoughts on why I'm getting a little bit of cloudy water in my tank here. I will ask you to go ahead and make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss anything I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. Thanks again for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed. Hope that was helpful to somebody. And don't forget, of course, this is my 20-gallon open-top Angelfish tank. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.